The psychological reason your relationships always fail. What if I told you that every failed relationship in your life follows the exact same psychological pattern? That there's one hidden reason, discovered by Carl Jung nearly a century ago, that explains why you keep attracting the wrong people, why your relationships feel like you're fighting the same battles over and over again, and why even when you think you found the one, it somehow falls apart in eerily familiar ways. Stay with me for the next few minutes, because what I'm about to reveal will completely change how you see love, attraction, and why your relationships have been failing. And if you want to finally break this cycle, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because this channel is dedicated to uncovering the deepest psychological truths about love and relationships. You see, most people think failed relationships are about compatibility, timing, or simply not finding the right person. But Jung discovered something far more profound and disturbing. He found that we don't just randomly fall in love with people. We're unconsciously drawn to individuals who trigger our deepest psychological wounds, our unresolved traumas, and our most primitive fears. This isn't some cosmic coincidence or bad luck. It's your psyche desperately trying to heal itself through romantic relationships. But here's the twist that makes this even more fascinating and tragic. The very people we're most attracted to are often the ones least capable of giving us what we actually need. Jung called this phenomenon psychological projection, and it's happening in your love life right now, whether you realize it or not. You're not falling in love with real people. You're falling in love with projections of your own unconscious mind. Think about your last relationship that ended badly. Can you remember that initial spark, that feeling of, this person gets me, or I've never felt this way before? That wasn't love at first sight. That was your unconscious mind, recognizing familiar patterns, familiar wounds, familiar dynamics from your past. Your psyche was saying, finally, here's someone who can help me work through my unresolved issues. But before we dive deeper into why this happens, let me ask you something that might make you uncomfortable. What if the person you're most attracted to is actually a mirror reflection of everything you've been trying to hide from yourself? Jung discovered that every human being has what he called a shadow, the parts of our personality that we've rejected, suppressed, or deemed unacceptable. These aren't necessarily evil or bad traits. They're simply aspects of ourselves that we learned to hide, usually in childhood because they weren't accepted by our parents, peers, or society. Your shadow contains your unexpressed anger, your hidden selfishness, your secret desires, your repressed creativity, and your authentic but unacceptable emotions. Now here's where it gets interesting for relationships. We're magnetically drawn to people who embody our shadow qualities. If you've always been the good girl who never gets angry, you'll find yourself irresistibly attracted to the rebellious bad boy who expresses all the rage you've been bottling up. If you've always been the responsible one who takes care of everyone else, you'll fall hard for the free spirit who seems to live without a care in the world. This attraction feels electric, passionate, and meant to be, because your unconscious mind is recognizing its missing pieces. It's like finding the other half of your soul, except it's actually finding the other half of your psyche. The half you've been denying exists. The problem is that while this creates incredible chemistry and intensity, it also creates incredible conflict. Your partner becomes both your salvation and your tormentor. They represent everything you wish you could be, but they also trigger every insecurity you have about those rejected parts of yourself. The free-spirited partner makes you feel alive and spontaneous, but they also make you anxious about stability and commitment. The strong, dominant partner makes you feel protected and taken care of, but they also make you feel powerless and small. This is why so many relationships start with fireworks and end in flames. You're not just dating another person, you're dating your own psychological complexity. Every fight you have with your partner is actually a fight between different parts of your own psyche. Every time they disappoint you, it's because they've failed to heal a wound that was never their responsibility to heal in the first place. Now, if you think the shadow projection is complex, wait until you understand what Jung called the anima and animus, and how these unconscious forces are sabotaging your ability to see your partner as they really are. Every man, according to Jung, has an inner feminine side called the anima, his unconscious image of the ideal woman, formed from his early experiences with his mother, sisters, and other significant women in his life. Every woman has an inner masculine side called the animus, her unconscious image of the ideal man, shaped by her relationships with her father, brothers, and other important male figures. Here's the crucial part. When you fall in love, you're not falling in love with the actual person standing in front of you. You're falling in love with how well they fit the image of your anima or animus. You're projecting this idealized image onto them, and they're doing the same to you. It's like both of you are wearing masks that perfectly match what the other person wants to see. This creates what Jung called the divine illusion of early love. Everything your partner does seems perfect, meaningful, and magical because you're not seeing their actual behavior. You're seeing your ideal partner overlaid on top of their real personality. When they laugh, you hear the laugh of your perfect woman or perfect man. When they touch you, you feel the touch of your soulmate, not just another human being with their own complexities and flaws. But projections can't be maintained forever. Real life has a way of cracking through even the most powerful illusions. Your partner will inevitably do something that doesn't fit your anima or animus image. They'll react to stress in a way your ideal partner wouldn't. They'll have needs, fears, or desires that don't align with your projection. They'll reveal themselves to be a complete, complex human being rather than the perfect match your unconscious mind created. When this happens, many people feel betrayed, deceived, or disappointed. This isn't the person I fell in love with, they say, and they're absolutely right, because the person they fell in love with never existed. It was a projection, a creation of their own psyche. The real person was always there, but they were invisible behind the mask of your ideal partner. This is why so many relationships die during the disillusionment phase. It's not that your partner changed, it's that you finally started seeing them as they actually are, instead of as your unconscious mind wanted them to be. But there's an even deeper layer to this psychological drama, and it might be the most important thing you learn about your love life today. Jung discovered that we have an unconscious compulsion to recreate the emotional dynamics of our childhood in our adult relationships. This isn't about consciously choosing partners who remind us of our parents. It's far more subtle and insidious than that. It's about unconsciously recreating the emotional patterns, the power dynamics, the communication styles, and even the specific types of conflict we experienced in our family of origin. Your psyche is constantly trying to resolve unfinished emotional business from your childhood by finding partners who will help you replay those same scenarios. If you grew up with a parent who was emotionally unavailable, you'll find yourself drawn to emotionally unavailable partners, not because you enjoy the pain, but because your unconscious mind believes that if you can finally get this type of person to love you fully, you'll heal the original wound. If you experienced inconsistent love and attention as a child, you'll be attracted to partners who are hot and cold, giving you intense connection followed by withdrawal. This is what Freud called repetition compulsion, and Jung expanded on it brilliantly. We don't repeat these patterns because we're masochistic or stupid. We repeat them because our psyche is always trying to heal itself, always attempting to resolve unfinished emotional business. The problem is that we're trying to heal childhood wounds through adult relationships, which rarely works because we're using the wrong tools for the job. Your romantic partner cannot and should not be responsible for healing your childhood trauma. They cannot give you the unconditional love you didn't receive from your parents. They cannot provide the emotional security you lacked growing up. They cannot fix your self-worth issues or fill the void in your soul. When you unconsciously expect them to do these things, you set up both yourself and your relationship for failure. This is why patterns repeat so consistently in people's love lives. The details change, different names, faces, backgrounds, but the emotional dynamics remain remarkably similar. You keep having the same fights, feeling the same disappointments, experiencing the same betrayals because you're unconsciously seeking out people who will trigger the same unresolved wounds over and over again. The most powerful of these unconscious patterns involves what Jung called the mother complex and father complex. These aren't just about having mommy issues or daddy issues. They're about how your early relationships with your parents shaped your entire template for what love looks like, feels like, and how it operates. Your mother complex influences how you give and receive nurturing, how you handle emotional intimacy, and what you believe about your own worthiness of love. If your mother was overprotective, you might find yourself in relationships where you feel suffocated or where you suffocate your partner. If she was emotionally distant, you might find yourself with partners who are emotionally unavailable, or you might become emotionally unavailable yourself as a protective mechanism. Your father complex affects how you deal with authority, power, and structure in relationships. It influences your relationship with your own personal power and how you interact with your partner's strength or weakness. If your father was absent or weak, you might find yourself attracted to very strong, dominant partners, or you might become controlling yourself to compensate for feeling powerless as a child. Here's what makes this particularly tricky. These complexes operate completely outside of your conscious awareness. You think you're making rational choices about who to date based on compatibility, attraction, and shared values. In reality, you're being guided by unconscious programming that was installed in your psyche before you were even old enough to understand what was happening. This is why people often end up in relationships that look nothing like what they say they want. A woman might say she wants a kind, gentle, emotionally available man, but she keeps falling for emotionally distant, challenging guys who remind her unconsciously of her emotionally unavailable father. A man might say he wants an independent, strong woman, but he keeps choosing needy, dependent partners who allow him to feel needed and important the way his mother made him feel. The tragedy is that both people are usually trying to heal legitimate wounds and meet real needs. The problem is that they're trying to get their childhood needs met through adult romantic relationships, which creates an impossible dynamic. Your partner cannot be your parent, your therapist, and your lover all at the same time. When you unconsciously expect them to fulfill all these roles, you burden the relationship with expectations it was never designed to carry. Jung believed that true love, mature, lasting love, only becomes possible when you've done the psychological work to understand and integrate these unconscious patterns. This doesn't mean you have to resolve all your childhood issues before you can have a healthy relationship, but it does mean you need to become conscious of what you're unconsciously seeking and expecting from your partners. One of the most destructive patterns in relationships occurs when partners become psychologically inflated or deflated in relation to each other. This happens when you either make your partner into a god or a devil, seeing them as either perfect and all-powerful or terrible and worthless. Both extremes are forms of projection that prevent you from seeing your partner as a real, complex human being. Psychological inflation happens during the honeymoon phase of relationships. Your partner can do no wrong. They're the most amazing, perfect, wonderful person who's ever existed. You might find yourself saying things like, "I've never felt this way before," or "You complete me," or "I can't live without you." While these feelings might seem romantic, they're actually signs that you've inflated your partner to superhuman status. When you inflate your partner, you're not seeing them. You're seeing your projection of perfection. You're making them responsible for your happiness, your self-worth, and your emotional well-being. This creates enormous pressure on both of you because no human being can live up to divine status for very long. Real people have bad days, make mistakes, have needs of their own, and sometimes disappoint us. Psychological deflation is the inevitable flip side of inflation. When your partner inevitably fails to live up to your impossible expectations, when they reveal themselves to be human rather than divine, the pendulum swings in the opposite direction. Now they become the worst person ever. Everything they do annoys you. Their flaws become magnified beyond all proportion. You might find yourself thinking, "How did I ever think this person was amazing?" Or "They've completely changed." But here's the thing that will blow your mind. Your partner hasn't changed at all. You've simply stopped projecting perfection onto them and started projecting your disappointment, anger, and disillusionment instead. You're still not seeing the real person. You're just seeing a different set of projections. This inflation-deflation cycle is one of the primary reasons why so many relationships follow the same predictable pattern: intense attraction and connection, followed by gradual disillusionment, conflict, and eventual breakup. People think this means they chose the wrong person, or that love just doesn't last, but really it means they never learned how to see their partner as a real person, rather than as a projection screen for their own psychological material. Breaking. This cycle requires what Jung called withdrawing your projections. This means learning to see your partner as they actually are, neither perfect nor terrible, but human. It means taking responsibility for your own happiness, your own emotional needs, and your own psychological healing instead of expecting your partner to provide these things for you. Perhaps the most common and destructive pattern in modern relationships is what I call the wounded healer dynamic, based on Jung's concept of the wounded healer archetype. This happens when two people unconsciously enter a relationship with the fantasy that they can heal each other's deepest wounds through love. One person becomes the wounded partner. They're dealing with depression, anxiety, trauma, addiction, or some other significant psychological challenge. The other becomes the healer. They're drawn to wounded people because helping others gives them a sense of purpose, importance, and meaning. They feel needed, valuable, and special when they're rescuing someone. This might sound noble and loving, but it's actually a psychological trap for both people. The healer gets to avoid looking at their own wounds by focusing obsessively on their partner's problems. They get to feel superior, wise, and psychologically healthy by comparison. Meanwhile, the wounded partner gets to remain stuck in their dysfunction because there's always someone there to enable them, rescue them, and take responsibility for their emotional well-being. Both people are using the relationship to avoid doing their own psychological work. The healer avoids their own healing by playing therapist to their partner. The wounded person avoids taking responsibility for their own healing by letting their partner do all the emotional labor. It creates a codependent dynamic where both people need each other to stay wounded in order for the relationship to function. This is why healer types often find themselves in relationship after relationship with troubled, damaged, or dysfunctional partners. It's not that they have bad luck or poor judgment. They're unconsciously attracted to people who need fixing because being needed is how they experience love and validation. Similarly, wounded people often find themselves in relationships with rescuer types, not because they're grateful for the help, but because being rescued allows them to avoid taking full responsibility for their own lives. The tragedy is that this dynamic prevents both people from experiencing real intimacy and authentic love. The healer can never relax and just be themselves because they're always on duty as the therapist. The wounded person can never be seen and loved for who they really are, because they're always being treated as a patient or a project rather than an equal partner. Real love requires two whole people choosing to share their lives together, not two broken people trying to use each other as bandages for their wounds. So how do you break these destructive patterns and create the possibility for genuine, mature love? Jung's answer was a process he called individuation, the journey of becoming conscious of your unconscious patterns and integrating all aspects of your personality into a whole, authentic self. The first step is radical self-awareness. You must become honest about your own psychological patterns, your shadow qualities, your unhealed wounds, and your unconscious projections. This requires looking at your relationship history not as a series of random events or other people's failures, but as a pattern that reveals something important about your own psyche. Look at the common themes in your relationships. What types of people are you consistently attracted to? What kinds of conflicts do you repeatedly have? What needs do you consistently expect your partners to meet? What roles do you unconsciously play? The rescuer, the victim, the rebel, the people pleaser. These patterns aren't accidents. They're your psyche's way of showing you what needs to be healed and integrated. The second step is shadow work, consciously acknowledging and integrating the parts of yourself that you've been rejecting or projecting onto your partners. If you're always attracted to confident people, you need to develop your own confidence. If you're drawn to creative types, you need to explore your own creativity. If you find yourself with controlling partners, you need to examine your own relationship with power and control. This doesn't mean you should become exactly like the people you're attracted to, but rather that you should develop those qualities in yourself in healthy, integrated ways. When you own your shadow qualities, instead of projecting them onto others, you become less magnetically attracted to people who embody them in dysfunctional ways. The third step is learning to love real people instead of projections. This means getting comfortable with imperfection, complexity, and humanity, both in yourself and in your partners. It means giving up the fantasy of finding someone who will complete you, heal you, or make you whole, and instead learning to appreciate someone who can walk alongside you as you both continue growing and evolving. Real love isn't about finding your other half. It's about two whole people choosing to create something beautiful together while maintaining their individual wholeness and authenticity. When you've done this psychological work, your entire approach to relationships transforms. Instead of unconsciously seeking partners who will trigger your wounds and play out familiar dramas, you begin attracting people who are also committed to consciousness, growth, and authentic connection. These transformed relationships look and feel completely different from the unconscious patterns most people repeat. There's less drama and intensity, but more genuine intimacy and connection. There's less projection and fantasy, but more appreciation for who your partner actually is. There's less neediness and codependence, but more genuine love and mutual support. You stop trying to change your partner and instead focus on your own continued growth and evolution. You stop expecting them to heal your wounds and instead take responsibility for your own psychological well-being. You stop looking for someone to complete you and instead seek someone to share your already complete life with. This doesn't mean these relationships are perfect or without challenges. It means the challenges are dealt with consciously rather than unconsciously. When conflicts arise, and they will, you're able to look at what psychological material is being triggered rather than just blaming your partner. You can ask yourself, what is this conflict trying to teach me about myself? What old wound is being activated? What projection am I making? Your partner becomes a mirror for your own consciousness rather than a screen for your projections. They help you see yourself more clearly, not because they're trying to fix or change you, but simply by being authentically themselves in relationship with you. You do the same for them. You become a catalyst for their growth and self-awareness. Simply by showing up as your most authentic self, these relationships are characterized by what Jung called mutual individuation, both people supporting each other's journey toward wholeness and authenticity while maintaining their own individual identities and paths. You're together because you choose to be, not because you need to be. You love each other because of who you actually are, not because of who you hope the other person might become. The most liberating truth about understanding these psychological patterns is that once you see them clearly, you can never be completely unconscious of them again. Awareness itself begins to dissolve the power these patterns have over your love life. You might still feel attracted to familiar types of people, but now you'll recognize what's happening and can make conscious choices instead of being driven by unconscious compulsions. This doesn't mean you'll never make mistakes or never fall into old patterns again. Consciousness is a process, not a destination. But it does mean that when you do slip back into unconscious patterns, you'll recognize it more quickly and can course correct before too much damage is done. The goal isn't to find the perfect relationship or to become the perfect partner. The goal is to become conscious enough to love real people in real ways, with all the messiness, complexity, and beauty that authentic human connection entails. When you stop trying to use relationships to heal your childhood wounds, you create space for relationships to actually nurture and support your continued growth as an adult. This is the secret that Jung discovered and that most people never learn. Love isn't something that happens to you. It's something you become capable of as you develop the psychological maturity to see others clearly and love them for who they actually are, rather than for what you need them to be. Your past relationship. Failures weren't failures at all. They were your psyche's attempts to teach you these lessons. Every painful breakup, every disappointment, every pattern you've repeated was bringing you closer to this understanding. Now that you have it, you can finally break the cycle and create the conscious, authentic love you've always been seeking. The person who will love you in this new way might be someone completely different from anyone you've ever been attracted to before. They might not trigger that familiar intensity or that sense of "you complete me." Instead, they'll offer something far more valuable. The opportunity to be fully seen, fully accepted, and fully loved for exactly who you are. This is the psychological reason your relationships have been failing. You've been unconsciously trying to heal childhood wounds through romantic love, instead of learning to love real people in real ways. If this resonates with you and you want to dive deeper into Jung's insights about love, psychology, and relationships, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. And remember, your next relationship doesn't have to repeat the patterns of your past. Now that you understand the psychology behind your attractions and conflicts, you have the power to choose consciousness over compulsion, authentic love over unconscious projection. The cycle ends here if you decide to let it.